Now, the junta-led Sahel nations are nationalizing gold mines to reclaim control over their mineral wealth from Western powers. Anti-West narrative and national sovereignty are at the center of their economic policy. And keeping up with this trend, Niger's junta has now announced the nationalization of the country's only industrial gold mine.
Ghana, which is Africa's top gold producer, is rolling out an ambitious gold purchase program aimed at shoring up its foreign reserves and stabilizing the Ghanaian cedi. The government has just signed a new deal with 9 additional mining companies, requiring them to sell 20% of their gold output to the state. This builds on a 2022 agreement with other industry giants. And under that deal, companies began selling a fifth of their annual production to the Bank of Ghana, settled not in dollars but in local currency.
For generations, Africa's story has been written by others. From colonial traders to multinational banks, outsiders drew the lines of power, and Africa's gold was their ink. But today, a new chapter is being written, not by foreign hands, but by African voices. Across the continent, a quiet revolution is unfolding. A movement that is not led by armies, but by visionaries. Not fought with weapons, but with wisdom. A revolution built on something ancient, something eternal, gold. Gold, the metal that shaped kingdoms, inspired empires, and outlasted them all. From the golden thrones of Ghana's Ashanti Empire to the mines of Johannesburg, Africa has always been a land of glittering promise. But for too long, that promise was taken, refined elsewhere, and sold back to its people at a higher price. Now, that cycle is beginning to end. It started quietly, a single policy decision in Ghana, a currency reform in Zimbabwe, a refinery initiative in Nigeria. Individually, they seemed small, but together, they signaled something much bigger. Africa was beginning to take control of its own wealth. In Ghana, one of the continent's top gold producers, a bold idea emerged: trade gold directly for oil, bypassing the dollar entirely. At first, the world watched with skepticism. But when it worked, when tankers arrived, fueled by Ghana's own reserves rather than foreign loans, the message was clear: Africa could chart its own economic course. In Zimbabwe, the government turned to the one thing that had always held value even when currency collapsed: gold. They introduced a digital token backed by real bullion, stored in the central bank. It wasn't just a financial experiment. It was a declaration that the nation's future would be secured by what it owned beneath its soil, not what it borrowed from abroad. In Nigeria, policymakers began to strengthen domestic refining, building local capacity to ensure that gold mined in the country stayed within its borders. Each bar refined at home became a symbol of self-sufficiency, a quiet yet powerful rejection of the old export model. And in South Africa, the continent's mining powerhouse, renewed focus turned towards sustainable and transparent gold production. The goal: to ensure that Africa's wealth fuels African progress, not just corporate profits overseas. Every move built momentum. Every reform told the same story: that a continent long treated as a source of raw materials was becoming a source of strength. Economists began to notice. Financial journals, often dismissive of African initiatives, started publishing cautious praise. Headlines spoke of Africa's gold awakening and the rise of resource sovereignty. Investors, once skeptical, began to look again, this time not as exploiters, but as partners. And yet, beyond policy and economics, something deeper was happening: a shift in spirit. Across Africa, young people began to speak differently about wealth. They no longer saw gold as a colonial legacy, but as a symbol of potential, proof that Africa held the keys to its own prosperity. In classrooms, in business meetings, in online discussions, one phrase kept echoing: we have everything we need. It's time to use it wisely. The idea spread beyond gold. If Africa could manage its gold, why not its oil? If it could refine its metals, why not its future technologies: lithium, cobalt, and rare earths? Step by step, a vision was taking shape: a self-sustaining continent trading on its own terms, guided by transparency, collaboration, and purpose. At the center of that vision stood a simple truth: ownership matters. Ownership means more than possession, it means power. It means setting the price instead of accepting it. It means deciding how resources are used, who benefits, and what legacy they leave behind. For decades, global markets dictated Africa's value. But now, Africa was beginning to dictate its own. As this transformation unfolded, the world began to pay attention. Analysts in London, New York, and Beijing studied charts, trying to understand how a continent once seen as dependent was starting to stand on its own. Some saw opportunity, others saw challenge. But what none could deny was this: Africa's gold was no longer just a commodity. It was a catalyst. In conference halls and summits, African leaders began to speak with renewed confidence. They no longer pleaded for fair treatment, they demanded fair partnership. And as each nation found its footing, a continental consciousness began to rise, that Africa's wealth, when united, could shift the balance of global economics forever. The awakening had begun, and the world could feel its tremor. Every continent has a heartbeat. For Africa, that heartbeat has always pulsed beneath the ground, deep in the earth where time hides its treasures. For centuries, that treasure gleamed in the form of gold. But the story of African gold is not just about mineral wealth. It is about endurance, faith, and rebirth. From the ancient Nubian mines along the Nile to the kingdoms of Mali and Songhai, gold shaped Africa's destiny long before the first European ship touched its shores. When the world still called Europe the Dark Continent, it was Africa's gold that lit up trade routes, inspired explorers, and built cities of legend like Timbuktu. Gold was not a symbol of greed then. It was a symbol of balance, a reminder that value came from the earth and returned to the people. Then the balance broke. Foreign flags replaced tribal banners. Mines that once funded communities began feeding distant empires. And slowly, the rhythm of Africa's gold became the rhythm of someone else's prosperity. But even under the weight of that history, the spirit of the continent never gave up. Because Africa's true wealth has never only been what lies beneath its soil, it has always been what lives within its people. In Ghana, miners in small communities still work the same rivers their ancestors did, guided by wisdom passed down through generations. Today, with new government-backed programs and modern refining centers, their gold doesn't have to leave the country to have value. It can strengthen the local economy, create jobs, and build futures. The gold stays home, and with it, the pride. In Zimbabwe, where economic challenges once left shelves empty and currency devalued, gold has become a stabilizing force. When the Reserve Bank introduced gold-backed digital tokens, it wasn't just a technical fix, it was psychological. It told every citizen, our wealth is real, our value is tangible, and our currency is connected to something that cannot be printed away. Nigeria, rich not only in oil but in human potential, has also turned its eyes toward the gold under its soil. New refineries and partnerships between government and local miners aim to ensure that when gold is extracted, the profits circulate within the Nigerian economy. Each small success strengthens the continent's collective economic independence. And South Africa, with its long history in mining, has shifted from quantity to quality, investing in ethical and environmentally responsible mining that protects both workers and nature. This shift reflects a deeper evolution, the understanding that progress and sustainability must walk side by side. Beyond the borders of each nation, a continental idea is forming, that the time has come to treat Africa's natural wealth as a shared inheritance. At the African Union's financial forums, leaders now talk about integrated value chains, shared refineries, and continental gold reserves. It's not just policy talk, it's a blueprint for the next generation. And behind every plan stands a rising generation of African economists, engineers, and entrepreneurs, young minds determined to prove that the world's oldest resource can power the world's youngest continent. They speak of blockchain for transparency, of local currencies linked to gold, of regional banking systems that keep wealth circulating among African nations instead of flowing outward. They are not waiting for permission. They are building the systems themselves. Economists once measured Africa's progress through the lens of foreign aid or investment inflows. But now, a new metric is emerging: how much wealth stays in Africa. Each ton of refined gold that doesn't leave unprocessed, each mine that pays fair wages, and taxes locally, each policy that builds regional trade. These are victories, quiet but powerful. And as these victories multiply, so does Africa's confidence. For the first time in modern history, the continent is beginning to define its value on its own terms. Gold is more than a commodity now. It is a mirror, showing Africa what it truly is: capable, resourceful, sovereign. This is not without challenges. The shadow of illegal mining still looms large, draining resources and damaging the land. Smuggling networks, corruption, and foreign pressure continue to test the system. But this time, Africa is confronting those challenges with awareness and unity. Civil society groups, journalists, and reformers are pushing for transparency. Technology is helping trace every bar of gold from mine to market. And ordinary citizens are demanding accountability because they understand that ownership without honesty is no progress at all. In markets across Accra, Harare, Lagos, and Johannesburg, gold is once again being discussed not as a dream, but as a duty. A duty to build economies that last. A duty to honor ancestors who mined by hand so their descendants could stand tall. A duty to leave behind systems that no longer depend on permission from outside powers. Some call this the African gold renaissance. But those who live it call it something simpler: a new beginning. Because gold may glitter, but what shines brighter is what it represents: unity, pride, and control over destiny. And as this new beginning takes shape, a question echoes from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Addis Ababa to Cape Town. What happens when Africa finally keeps what it earns? It is a question that carries both hope and challenge. Because when a continent of 1.4 billion people begins to hold its wealth, the entire world feels the shift. The gold within Africa is not just in its mines. It's in its people, its ideas, its resilience, and its faith in a better tomorrow. And that is a kind of wealth no one can ever take away. For decades, the flow of gold was one way, from African soil to foreign vaults. But something subtle is happening in the markets. The tide is beginning to run the other way. Analysts in New York and London notice new buyers. African central banks quietly increasing their bullion holdings. Shipments that once left for Swiss refineries are now being processed in Accra or Johannesburg. African universities are adding degrees in mining engineering and metals technology. What was once extraction is becoming transformation. In the East African corridor, nations such as Tanzania and Sudan are building shared refineries, lowering costs and increasing transparency. In West Africa, ECOWAS ministers are discussing a regional gold standard for trade settlements inside the bloc. And across the Sahel, small-scale miners are being brought into formal systems that protect both workers and the environment. Each step rewrites long-standing assumptions that Africa must sell raw materials to survive. That value can only be created overseas. That control must always lie elsewhere. As these assumptions crumble, a new pattern of partnership begins to form. Asian and Middle Eastern investors, once distant, are seeking joint ventures that keep production on the continent. Even Western companies are adapting, shifting from ownership to collaboration, from extraction to equity. The message is clear. Africa is no longer a passive supplier. It is an active architect of the global economy. Balance scale the balance of power in gold. In international finance, gold is more than glitter, it is confidence. When a nation holds gold, it holds credibility. By reclaiming control of their reserves, African countries are strengthening that credibility together. Take the African Continental Free Trade Area. With more than 50 member states, it is creating the largest single market on Earth by population. Underneath its trade routes could soon lie a backbone of African-owned gold, reserves that support stable currencies and lower transaction risks between nations. Imagine goods moving from Lagos to Nairobi, backed not by borrowed dollars, but by Africa's own wealth. That vision is beginning to take shape. At the African Union's financial summits, delegates now discuss building continental vaults and digital platforms to track gold production. Technology is the new watchdog. Blockchain ledgers for mine-to-market traceability, satellite imaging to reduce illegal mining, fintech systems that let citizens invest in national reserves. For the first time, transparency and trust are working hand in hand. Markets respond to confidence, and confidence grows with unity. As African nations coordinate policy, investors see reduced risk. The result? More capital returning to the continent, not as aid, but as partnership. Globe showing Europe-Africa, the global ripple, no revolution happens in isolation. When Africa strengthens control of its gold, the world feels it. Bullion traders adjust forecasts. Central banks diversify holdings. And suddenly, a continent once labeled emerging is setting trends in monetary strategy. But this story isn't about rivalry, it's about balance. Africa's rise in gold management brings stability to a world shaken by inflation and currency volatility. Diversified markets mean fewer shocks, fairer prices, and more inclusive growth. Economists call it multipolar prosperity. For everyday Africans, it simply means opportunity. More jobs, stronger currencies, better schools funded by real wealth, not debt. The tide has turned, not against anyone, but toward a future where prosperity is shared. Picture a vault somewhere on the continent, rows of gleaming bars stamped, "Made in Africa." Each bar tells a story of miners, engineers, bankers, and dreamers who refuse to let history repeat itself. Children visit museums in Accra and Pretoria to learn how gold built both ancient empires and modern economies. Entrepreneurs in Lagos design jewelry brands that compete globally while sourcing ethically. Startups in Nairobi build fintech apps that let citizens invest micro amounts into their nation's reserves. And artists across the diaspora use gold leaf and symbolism to celebrate identity and renewal. This is what control looks like, not isolation, but imagination. The new Africa is not closing its doors to the world, it's opening them on equal terms. Gold is simply the language through which that equality is first being spoken. For centuries, Africa's gold powered other nations' dreams. Now it is powering its own. In reclaiming this ancient resource, Africa is reclaiming something even greater, its narrative. Every generation is given one defining task. For this one, it is to turn natural wealth into lasting prosperity, to ensure that the next century belongs to those who build, not those who borrow. From the deserts of Mali to the coasts of Ghana, from the highlands of Ethiopia to the plains of South Africa, the message is the same. The future will be written in gold, African gold. Because gold is more than metal. It is memory, it is promise, it is proof that value endures. And as the sun rises over a continent once described as potential and now recognized as power, one truth glows brighter than ever. Africa's time is not coming. Its time is here.